Hi, it's Kit Allowitz with another Leadership Journey video segment. Today I'd like to speak about emotional intelligence, the crossroads of origin, maturity, and wisdom. We've learned much and talked much about the idea of emotional intelligence over the past year on our leadership journey. I'm guessing you could likely tell me the definition of emotional intelligence in your sleep by now. Am I right? Maybe even define it backwards, or maybe even show me what wise emotional intelligence looks, feels, and smells, and even tastes like. Am I right? While saying the two words emotional intelligence together, and for some of us, and in some cases, slinging out in conversations is as easy as getting candy at Halloween, it's become the norm. However, I'm also finding that having been and exemplifying and embodying the personification of emotional intelligence is perhaps easy to say, and for many of us, including me, much harder to do. It takes some emotional awareness and choice to be emotionally intelligent. You might argue that some humans come with more of a propensity towards or gravitation towards exhibiting skills like self-control, self-awareness, self-regard, social effectiveness, and social perception, while others of us really have to work hard at understanding what it is and using the space between stimulus and response to be emotionally intelligent, or be emotionally mature, or finally be emotionally wise. Whichever camp you find yourself in, or maybe you're somewhere in the middle, the skills of being able to do things like having integrity, being able to monitor yourself, having introspection, having self-knowledge, being open, having impulse control, stress tolerance, emotional stability, resilience, delayed gratification, be able to observe without judgment, empathy, mindfulness, interpretation, anticipation, conflict management, relationship management, accountability, maybe even ego management, influence, motivation, independence, interdependence, self-respect, optimism, and confidence almost always lead to wiser outcomes than to not have these sorts of cognitions. Our leadership journey exploration has really been related to emotional intelligence and is aimed at creating a personal awareness that if you and I are more self-aware of ourselves and allow adoption of principles to play into our lives, is to the degree that we can be more self-aware of others and see more similarities than differences in others. For example, literally just about every human being likes to be heard and be recognized and likes to tell others about themselves, literally. So once you are innately aware of this yourself, then the next logical step in the evolution of emotional intelligence is that you would be more innately curious about others. You would show interest and be more inquisitive as to the life and the nature of others, right? Yet I don't see this inquisitiveness, this genuine curiosity of others in enough of others, including myself. Megan and I have recently been observing how often we see others in our conversations asking questions and learning about others. We speculate, after observing some 36 different conversations and engagements, that the curiosity by others towards others is only about 9%. This seems low, and at the same time, if remotely accurate, is a travesty. If people are more, in fact, similar than different, and if you and I are like, no, I'd say love to be heard and recognized and tell others about ourselves, then for many of us, we have work to do related to emotional intelligence, emotional maturity, and finally, emotional wisdom. So I ask, after having been explored and exposed to emotional intelligence for the better part of a year on our leadership journey, how are you feeling about it? I wonder, are you feeling more comfortable with it? Or maybe you have done, or we have done nothing more than confuse you in terms of the several different angles and topics relating to emotional intelligence in terms of what it is and what it is not. In the final analysis, you might argue that emotional intelligence is really knowing and living the lead principles. It's about understanding yourself on the way to understanding and interacting wiser with others. Maybe? I love all the lead principles, but I especially like lead principle number 7. Do you remember lead principle number 7? Number 7 states that human relations is not you dealing with others. It is you dealing with yourself dealing with others. How profound is that? I mean, really, can you argue to any degree about that being a principle in terms of it having factual basis? I think it smells like the aspect of getting to the far side of complexity of what emotional intelligence really is as we look at this idea of looking at ourselves dealing with others. It's very similar to the principle that people are more similar than different. The differences, in fact, lie in degree, not in dimension. In fact, the more you learn about different people, the less difference I think you see between people. Allow me to walk you briefly through some of the different perspectives on emotional intelligence that we have been on so far and discussed on our leadership journey. So first, we spoke about Daniel Goleman, his book Emotional Intelligence, Why It Can Matter More Than IQ. It was actually a fascinating read. It was a long book to get through, but fascinating. It described a cluster of skills and competencies which are focused into 4 key capacities: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and then relationship management. This was interesting, and in fact, these 4 still very much resonate with me. Next, we gave you a chance to look at emotional intelligence from the work of Travis Bradberry's book, Emotional Intelligence 2.0. It was a much smaller book, shorter book, fun to read, and I think to date is still the world's most popular emotional intelligence test that you can take, if a legit test actually exists, which is debatable depending on who you ask. In Travis's book, he touts that knowing what emotional intelligence is and knowing how to use it can improve every aspect of our lives in very different ways. Emotional Intelligence 2.0, the book, is in fact a step-by-step guide or program for increasing your emotional intelligence using Daniel Goleman's 4 core capabilities, those being self-aware, self-management, self-awareness, and relationship management. Now, next on Leadership Journey, we spent some considerable time looking at emotional intelligence from the viewpoints of the origins of this intelligence. Now, I have to say, this has been my favorite angle of emotional intelligence so far. We brought in Dr. Brett Savage, and he opened the possibilities through the work of Martin Buber's concept of I-it, I-you. To me, this is legit thinking. The idea that you can see another human being in really just one of 2 ways: as an it, a thing, an object, or you can see another person as a you, a person, a human, a person more similar than different to you. In terms of emotional intelligence, imagine the vastly different potential outcomes in relationships and conversations as we literally ride this line between seeing another person as a thing or as a person. I still challenge each of us to think that to the degree that we are not getting the outcomes that we seek at work, at home, in our relationships, is literally to the degree that we choose in that moment of choice to see another person that we're engaging in sort of conversation is either as an I-it or as an I-you. Now, I-it, I-you is also about you. It's about you taking responsibility and you choosing to get completely unreasonable in situations where tensions and differences may arise, in being willing to turn your chair towards the other person first. Not waiting for them to turn their chair first. You be first. You own the situation. You own taking responsibility. You own finding the way to get back into alignment. Now, that is emotional intelligence. No, better said, that's emotional maturity. No, that's emotional wisdom. Perhaps the highest level of attainment on this pendulum of emotional madness. Now, with all that said, all this stuff is in fact easy to say and yet very much harder to actually get done. In fact, I'm not good at it. I want to be, but perhaps I don't really want to be that bad. Not bad enough. Otherwise, I would be wiser at turning my chair more often in to see the other person. Especially in those interactions where things go sideways. Emotions rise, feelings get hurt, egos take over, and I don't say or do or act in terms of seeing the other person as a you. That's the ongoing challenge to myself. See more I, you, and less of I, it. Lastly, related to emotional intelligence, if you ask Dr. Matthew Chodkowski, he will invite you to consider that perhaps our entire 2.5-year leadership journey so far has been the exploration of our emotional intelligence, or lack thereof. This exploration began as we each attended the LEAD program. Think about it. Of the 64 principles, which ones deal with ideas related to self-control, self-awareness, self-regard, self-effectiveness, and social perception? How about all 64 principles deal with this idea? The 64 lead principles contain oodles of insight into this idea that we have emotions, we have intelligence. If you put them together, you get the opportunity to get intelligent about your emotions, both understanding your own, understanding others, and using your awareness of you and others' emotions to drive wiser outcomes as you interact with others for healthier, more mutually influenceable outcomes. The idea of emotional intelligence is to be aware of how emotions play into the outcomes that we seek. We can either use these emotions to our advantage, or we can be the cause of outcomes we don't in fact want. Perhaps once we are more cognizant of the dimensions of how emotions play in our favor or disfavor, we can move from not just being emotional intelligent, but achieve emotional maturity a higher way. And then to totally blow your mind, what if we could move from emotional maturity to another realm, a higher realm called emotional wisdom? The idea of wisdom is having experience, knowledge, and good judgment to shape the outcomes that we seek. It's based on the soundness of our actions and our decisions. Perhaps once we master an awareness of ourselves and then others, it can lead to higher intelligence and more maturity, which would allow for wisdom to be achieved. And then you might argue that once we have wisdom, we might actually more readily see the world and situations as they truly are. As Anais Nin used to say, we often don't see the world as it is, but as we are, and therein lies the problems. If we can get past this tendency to be focused on just ourselves, see what truly is, then maybe that's what enlightenment is. Maybe, in fact, enlightenment is this fifth dimension and the final attainment on the levels of emotional intelligence. Enlightenment is the place where knowledge, decisions, experience, intelligence, maturity, wisdom, they free us from ourselves and our thinking our emotions control us, or that we can, in fact, control them because we can. That freeing place is where we can in fact see the world and the situations as they truly are, not mired down by our stories or the situation or the various sorts of stimuli or limitations or other emotions. Consider that. I invite you to stay on the journey. I invite you to seek even higher ways of massaging your emotional intelligence. Seek emotional maturity. Seek emotional wisdom. Seek emotional enlightenment. See you next time. I'm Kit Alowitz.